Welcome to this week's podcast. I have brought on Dr. Russell Proctor. Dr. P, welcome.
Welcome to you too. Glad to be here.
Dr. P was a professor of mine 10 years ago at NKU. I attended Northern Kentucky University, and we've stayed in touch all these years, and I reached out asking him to come on. So welcome.
Glad to be here.
So give a little background. Where do you live and what are you up to?
I live in Alexandria, Kentucky, which is just outside of Cincinnati. I'm professor emeritus now at Northern Kentucky University. I taught there for 25 years. I'm retired from teaching, but now I'm writing textbooks. I have two textbooks that I use and that I co-author, and they're on 3-year revision cycles. So I'm still busy doing that. So I'm not totally retired. I'm just have a different focus to my work now.
And I know we're currently in spring of 18, but is baseball your number one hobby or interest?
It's my number one hobby, and my Reds finally won last night after a long losing streak, so I'm feeling a little bit more upbeat today. But I love baseball, I love football, I love watching sports, and diehard fan of the Reds, of the Bengals, and of the NKU Norse, who are a great basketball team now. So
that's awesome. I actually attended my first Rockies game of the season last week, and they had a bench clearing brawl.
I saw that. You posted that, and I went and watched the brawl. It was pretty nasty.
I mean, it was almost like I was at a hockey game. But yeah, I want to get on topic. Today we want to discuss I'm all about living a balanced life, and something you brought up is how and especially in today's world, so many of us we don't get enough sleep.
I would agree. And I probably ought to start here by saying I am not a sleep researcher. I have a doctorate, but it's in communication, not in neuroscience. But I have done a lot of reading, a lot of research on this subject, and I think it's something that we just haven't given enough time and attention to. I remember when you originally asked me to talk with you, you said, is there anything that you used to say to college students that might be applicable to, a wide variety of people? And I used to talk about sleep with my students, and it would always catch them off guard. My students used to regularly take a full load of classes, have 1, 2, or 3 jobs, active social lives, involved in student activities. And of course, they only had 24 hours in their day. And one of the first things that would end up on the chopping block would be their sleep. And they would tell me how stressed out they were, how anxious they were, and that they were going to pull an all-nighter in order to be ready for a test the next day. And I would say to them something that I think very few people said, namely, why don't you get to bed at a reasonable time tonight, get a good night's sleep, then wake up early in the morning and do some studying then. That I think your studying will be much more effective. You'll have much more concentration and recall than if you pulled an all-nighter and tried to go into your exam after that.
I can say in 4 years of schooling, I never did an all-nighter. I'm not a night owl, but I was that girl studying last minute, walking to class, or I would be studying in the class before and maybe not paying attention to that one, but I was a crammer. That's just kind of how I did it.
And there's some value to cramming that research tells us in terms of our cognitive processes that those last things that we study before we go into an exam are important. So I'm not necessarily anti-cramming. I do think there are better ways to study, but I'm really anti-cutting sleep in order to study or work on projects, because I think that sleep will make you a more efficient and effective studier and academic student.
Well, and even outside of college, so adults and people, parents in corporate world, and what are the detriments to lack of sleep?
Well, there's lots of them, and in fact, I even got some together with me here. The list is pretty scary. That research, and again, I'm not talking about conjecture or folklore. I'm talking about scientific neuroscience research has shown us that there's a correlation between lack of sleep and, are you ready for it, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, depression, PTSD, anxiety, dementia, and yes, even early death. So in other words, the physical symptoms of not getting enough sleep are pretty serious.
Well, and all those health benefits that you listed off, if you think about it, if you're don't have enough sleep, so there's all these people going out and getting super caffeinated and then probably not taking care of their health. So eating like
Yeah.
crap. So now you don't have enough energy, you don't feel good, so you're eating like crap, so you're feeling worse, and then you're so caffeinated and the downer. I mean, it's just an ugly cycle.
It is. And the funny thing is, I think at least in recent years, people have started to say, you need to eat healthier. And a lot of people have embraced that as a means towards physical and mental health. And a lot of people have pushed, recreation, exercise, yoga, meditation, have pushed a lot of those activities. And I think, again, those are being embraced and are cool. But I don't hear many people out there pushing sleep. I don't
Right.
hear many people saying, here's one of the things you ought to do. And let me read a quote from a neuroscientist, and this was in Time Magazine last year. It says, hold tight, I used to suggest that sleep is the third pillar of good health, along with diet and exercise, says a neuroscientist from Berkeley. But I don't agree with that anymore. Sleep is the single most effective thing you can do to reset your brain and body for health. Single most effective. So in other words, if you've bought in on exercise and you've bought in on diet, but you haven't bought in on sleep, you're probably not doing the most important thing you can do to have your brain be restored and healthy and invigorated.
Well, and with all those, it's still creating that balance. And I know we talked in, there's that number, 8 hours of sleep. And my opinion, obviously I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I don't think there's a one size fits all. So yeah, I might need 8 or 9, but my neighbor, he says he totally functions well on 6. And maybe that really does work for some people. But I guess my point would be, if you're telling everybody we have to have 8 hours of sleep and there's people out there that function on 6, I don't want to stress them out thinking, well, how do I find 2 more hours?
The neuroscientists, again, do tell us that there's a range and one size fits all. You're right. Does not fit all. You're right. But the range that they give is 7 to 9 hours. Now, I know very few people who get 9 or even need 9, although research shows that teenagers and kids certainly do. But the bottom end on that is 7, and research suggests that if you're cutting yourself short of that, you're not functioning at your full capabilities. And I'm sure there are people who say, well, I can do it. Well, the question is, and what we can't really determine, is how much better would you function if you got more sleep?
And I've definitely heard a lot of this too. Do you personally, or have you read things that can help people create that structure or consistency or that evening routine to get them in bed at time and a good night's sleep?
That's a good question, and you're right. Routine and rhythm is the number one thing that's recommended by sleep researchers. That I think a lot of people like to say, well, I'll shortcut it here and then catch up on the weekends, or tonight I stay up to 3, but tomorrow night I'll crash at 9 p.m. And again, research says that doesn't work. Our body needs rhythms. Our body needs consistency. So I think it's a matter of just the same way you say, I'm going to exercise every day, or I'm going to buy healthy food, that you make decisions that say, I'm going to be to bed by this time every night, and I'm going to wake up by this time. I'm retired now, by the way, and one of the things I've purposed to do is to not sleep away my mornings, that I purpose to get up at a set relatively early time every morning, and still continue going to bed at a relatively early time, and I keep that rhythm. And that rhythm is what researchers tell us is the best thing that we can do. They also say that it's important to create an ideal climate for your sleep. That is, darken the room as much as you can. Lots of prohibitions against having any electronics. We have no TV in our bedroom. I don't have a smartphone and don't use one. I don't bring my laptop into the bedroom. All electronics off, because they stimulate the brains in ways that make it very hard to turn off. And then research shows things like big meals, alcohol. There are other things that are not good to do right before sleeping. So, and I think a lot of people know those prohibitions.
Right. The thing that I actually heard most recently is, and I'm guilty. I'm one of those that would lay in bed and play on Pinterest or scroll through something and then, lights out. But supposedly we need to have at least an hour before we lay to bed with no electronics. Put your phone away, put the computer
Yep.
away, because the lights from them, that totally affects us.
That is correct. That is correct. And I always say that going to bed and going to sleep are two different things.
Mm.
And I go to bed at a particular hour every night, and then during that hour, I read. That's when I read magazines, light fare, stuff that isn't overly stimulating, heavy research or anything like that. That's when I read Sports Illustrated and Reader's Digest and Time Magazine and those kinds of things. And I'll read for a good 45 minutes to an hour before turning in and going to sleep. And again, I think that's part of the rhythm that my body is now used to.
So on a night when you don't have a good night's sleep, how are you affected the next day?
Well, research shows us, and it makes good sense, that we're not as alert. We don't have, our concentration is poor, and our recall is bad. That all of those things, in addition to the physical maladies, mentally we're not going to be at our peak. And if you think back to what I was talking about with the all-nighters, that when your brain can't focus and you're trying to take in information, you won't be as alert and your concentration will be down, and you won't recall that information nearly as well, which is why I suggested get a good night's sleep, wake up alert and ready to go, and your brain is then far more likely to process that information and retain that information than if you didn't have the sleep.
And I guess what we're saying is sleep, obviously that number one pillar you discussed about, but having that good night's sleep is just a stepping stone to then creating other healthy habits.
Yes, you bet. And I think, he talked about that triumvirate: diet, exercise, and sleep. And I think those are three very important combinations in it. And I think it's important to have sabbaticals and rest. I think it's important to have play and recreation. There's lots of things to do to make sure that we're not just, killing ourselves by staying overly stressed all the time.
Yeah. What could you say to a workaholic? Because I know plenty of those, that they would rather work and be at the office, and obviously sleep comes last, social people. I mean, what do you say to them?
Well, it's tough to know what to say because it's about their having to make a decision and being convinced that there is value and merit in, say, sleep. And that's a tough sell. I think most people think that sleep, they connect it with laziness. That wow, I could be working, but instead I'm just shutting off my brain and it's laying dormant there. And that's a basic misunderstanding of what happens to our brain during sleep. The fact is, our brain during sleep is very active and it's doing all sorts of restorative and reparative functions.
Mm-hmm.
I liken it, on most computers, there's a program called defrag, which is running in the background, that defragments our hard drive. And that defrag throws out old stuff, cleans up wasted space, compresses things together, and as a result of doing that, your computer runs more efficiently. Well, that's essentially what's happening at night while you're sleeping. All sorts of neurons and electrical impulses are cleansing your brain, cleaning your brain, restoring your brain, and getting it back to full activity. So the notion that your brain isn't working, and I should be working, and why would I turn off my brain when I could be working? Well, your brain is working. It's doing very important things. And just like if you cut off the defragment program, in the middle of it, when your computer goes to function again, it will not function as well as if you let it go its full distance. So I think getting away from the notion of thinking of sleep as lazy and thinking of it as doing important neuro work for us, I think can help people get away from that trap of not sleeping.
Even something that just came to mind, a simpler analogy would be your gas tank in your vehicle, right? So if sleep
Yeah.
is when you're full and you have enough whether it's 8 hours or whatever works for you, or if you have less. And when you're running on E, I mean, at some point you're going to run out.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And I think we all know what it's like to be running on fumes, to not have enough sleep. And most people will tell you when that happens that they often get sick. That that, oh man, I've been running it ragged, burning the candle at both ends, and now I've got a cold or the flu or whatever. And again, there's medical research to back that. Our immune systems don't work as well when we don't have enough sleep as when we do. That our brains need to be alert in order to do all of those physiological and biological functions for us. So if you get sick when you get tired, there's a reason for it.
Well, yeah, I think the body's screaming, slow down, I need rest. Let's take a break. And that's what it has to do.
And if you think about, that most medicines, I think about NyQuil, everyone knows NyQuil, and it says, it will help you get the rest you need, that they know that the best thing to do when you're sick is to get sleep, that there's something restorative there. So we know this intuitively. I think we just have to remind ourselves of that.
For sure. I'm curious, and a thought came to me. In all your research, what did they have to say about naps? Sometimes
that's a good question. I think it's a legit way to help make up for erratic sleep cycles, particularly for people who have unusual shifts or changing shifts. And there are a number of companies, particularly in other countries now, but it's coming to the United States where they're encouraging, going in for a nap, downtime, get yourself into a dark, quiet room and try to, turn off for a half an hour. So I think there's some legitimacy to that, and it can help you make up some of the time you may have lost overnight.
Sometimes those afternoon 20-minute power naps make me a new person.
I agree. I've had that happen too. Sometimes they also leave me wanting more and just more tired. So again, if you make it a part of your rhythm, my dad worked a late shift and took a nap every day from like 1 to 2 o'clock, something like that, before he went into work at 4. And if a nap is part of your rhythm, I think it'll do all the vital functions that a nighttime would. By the way, sorry if you hear that noise. They're working on my roof right now. So.
Okay, no worries. I want to end on a lighter note. And so what I like to do on each of my episodes is do a rapid fire session. So I just have a couple questions for you, and whatever comes to mind, roll with it.
Great.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Matthew 6:33. Sorry, I went spiritual there, but that's a life verse for me.
That's okay. Are you currently reading a book, or do you have one you recommend?
I just got done reading a book by a person named Kate Bowler. I'm trying to remember the title now. It was, anyway, she's somebody who had cancer and how she overcame that, and it's a powerful story. I don't remember the title offhand, but Kate Bowler is her name. She's in the divinity school at Duke University, and she talked about how common things that people say to people who are sick are really not very helpful at all. So I liked it as a communication professor.
All right. And finally, what advice would you give to your younger self?
There's a song whose chorus goes, everything is going to be all right. I would say everything is going to be all right. That those things that I stressed about and that I worried about, it would have been nice to know that, in the end, it's going to turn out okay. So I would whisper into a 25-year-old Russ Proctor's ear, hey, that thing you're stressed about? It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right.
For sure. I think that is great life advice.
But to connect that to the book I was talking about before, I think that's advice not to give to somebody else, but to give to yourself. That when somebody tells me, oh, I've got cancer, and I say, oh, everything's going to be all right. Well, I don't know that, and I don't think that's helpful at all. But I think when you can give that advice, this too will pass, I will get through this, I will succeed, that advice to yourself is different than trying to give it to somebody else who's not ready to hear it.
For sure. Dr. P, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope the listeners get some more sleep.
I hope so too. Thanks so much for having me on. Best of luck to you and to your podcasts.